name is Alexa Davis. Thank you so much for being here with us today. When during orientation I was asked, "Are you an agent of change?" my first thought was, how can I be? I'm an 18-year-old with little life experience, rendering me no more capable of creating social change than anyone else. But now, 6 months later, I see a drastic difference in my perspective, and thus, how I view the world, and the roles I see myself taking moving forward in life. I began this shift with a simple task, examining the assumptions I previously held about myself, others, and the world around me. I also began building emotional muscles I hadn't exercised much before. I needed empathy when my Guatemalan host mother told me how my country's president made her feel. I needed humility to realize that when the Thai children were excited to see me, it was simply because of my skin color, not because I was personally important to them. And I needed to balance resilience with cultural awareness when I was abruptly questioned by Ghanaians for having facial piercings and then received unwanted negative attention. The experiences of living with host families, being startled by both culture shock and reverse culture shock, and exploring a curriculum that fosters divergent thinking have really allowed me to grow in many unexpected ways in just a 6-month span of time. But I feel my personal growth has been greatest and my capacity for critical, independent thinking. At the beginning of the trip, I had questions that drew on my personal experience, like, what assumptions do I hold about others? That list was long and exhaustive, but when I was asked to apply it to other people, I was stumped. On day 5 of the trip, we analyzed a book we were supposed to read prior. I did do the reading, I promise. And we were asked to think about the assumptions the narrator made about the other characters. I couldn't do it. I could not put myself in the narrator's mind and think past the obvious. As members of my small group composed a list, I nodded my head, seeing the points they were making, but not being able to make any myself. I was stuck at the surface level. As seminars continued, I found myself constantly able to answer questions that were directly addressed in readings. And it all sounded right because the authors told me it was. I had knowledge. What was missing was understanding. I needed someone else to point out conceptual or controversial ideas. Last week, we had a meeting with the U.S. Agency of International Development, USAID, whose mission is to, quote, promote and demonstrate democratic values abroad and advance a free, peaceful, and prosperous world, end quote. The man we met with talked about the clear choice recipient countries are facing when seeking aid, China or the U.S. According to USAID, they are the obvious way to go because they promote democracy and American values, whereas China promotes Chinese values. In that moment, my immediate reaction was to crumple my face with confusion at the hypocrisy. I did not agree with what he was saying and was questioning his rationale for the U.S. being the best possible option. I was questioning him. I didn't need anyone else around me to tell me what to think. I had already been figuring that out for myself for the past 6 months. And while the skill of independent thinking had been building all along, that was my first real experience talking to someone in a position of power who is supposedly an expert in this field. And I felt strongly enough in my understanding of the discussion that I was listening to myself instead of taking someone else's word as my truth. Through the experiential learning this program is designed to provide, I have found my own values, priorities, opinions, and ideas that have led me to ask more questions than provide answers. I have felt a shift in my ability to create complex thoughts as knowledge has become a deeper understanding, and I'm really proud of it. After every curriculum seminar, Kelly and Isaac had us write one question and one takeaway. And every time I thought that what I was writing was obvious and unthoughtful. Fresh out of seminar, the conversations had been exhausted, to the point of the topic seeming too familiar. And on top of that, it was hard to consider these ideas as belonging to me because I had just considered them for the first time only an hour before due to prompting by my leaders or required readings. But now as I go back and read my own thoughts and words from 3 months ago, such as, to be a liberated learner, one must unlearn a lot of previously learned skills, behaviors, and information, and there exists no blueprint for development. Projections of future outcomes based on universal assumptions don't always line up. I can see how my ideas have formed. I have now had time to reflect on the seminar essential questions and make connections to the real world, finding my own truth in the jumble of new information. The topic that claimed most of my reflection comes from the longest ongoing discussion we had as a group, trying to define development and understand what that term encompasses. From orientation all the way to Reflection Week, we were still unable to collectively come up with an agreeable definition of the word. But we came a long way in our understanding as we explored 3 very different regions of the world. First, for my personal understanding, I first had to break my habit of using the terms first world and third world. They are, in fact, political terms relating to alliances from the Cold War rather than categorizers of economic status, as they are so often used today. Truthfully, I didn't know this uncommon but important bit of information until orientation. So after I nixed those from my vocabulary, I began using the word developing, especially when referring to the countries this program would take me to. I didn't realize how clueless I was until I began searching for perspectives different from my own and the people from the communities we stayed with. What I realized is this: these countries are altogether different from mine. They have different resources and alternate ways of fulfilling societal demands. For example, Ghana's clinics, by American standards, are lacking in modern means of health care, but they serve their purpose for the Ghanaian communities. Being a privileged, white American teenager, I would never be serviced in a clinic with chickens running around in the waiting room. My mother would never have taken baby Alexa to be weighed from a scale hanging on a tree branch. The realities of our world are not the same, but that does not make them less developed. How can we even classify one country as developed or not when we can't even fully define that word? So naturally, that was the next step, right? Defining the very word I thought I was using correctly. But development is a multidimensional term that fits on a spectrum model as opposed to a binary one. It includes socioeconomic, political, and social factors, along with population and infrastructure. The best, though definitely imperfect definition I have come across is actually from our meeting with the World Bank. The man we had our meeting with happened to be from Ghana, and he presented us with a book entitled Democracy and Development in Africa by an African author named Claude Ake. Ake defined development as the process by which people create and recreate themselves and their life circumstances to realize higher levels of civilization in accordance with their own choices and values. Let me read that again. Development is the process by which people create and recreate themselves and their life circumstances to realize higher levels of civilization in accordance with their own choices and values. What I like about this definition is that it highlights how contextual and situational development is, and the importance of bettering the individual self to better the society as a whole. And as I said, that is the best definition I have found for myself, but even still, I have a point of disagreement. When he says higher levels of civilization, he is pointing out an inherent power dynamic, suggesting that there are civilizations deemed better than others. Furthermore, he describes development as if it is an entirely internal process, failing to mention how external forces, like organizations or whole countries, can alter the direction of change. So here I am again, questioning the experts and trying to separate fact from someone else's perception. My final realization regarding development has been about, well, what term do I use if neither first world, third world, nor developed, developing are correct? Why do we need to break them into these categories? I think that it tends to be a natural reaction of us, Americans, to think that we have everything figured out, that we are the top dog, and everyone else needs our help. But we can't put sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia in the same category. We can't even put Thailand and Cambodia in the same category. If we're talking about countries with political unrest, let's say that instead of calling them developing. If we're talking about countries that are experiencing economic growth, let's point that out. Let's educate ourselves on the places we're discussing and be more specific. so that way, through conversation, we can educate others. To my surprise, the part of the curriculum that has been most meaningful to me was sustainable agriculture. Since Guatemala has been in the back of my mind as I buy myself snacks with excessive packaging or prepare myself a bigger meal than I can eat. As the trip wore on, I became continuously more aware of my role in sustainability. Kentucky is an agriculture state, and growing up, my grandmother made sure I knew which crops the corn, tobacco, and soybeans were. I come from a family of not only Kentucky farmers, but also members of the National Park Service. Admiring and respecting nature was always an unquestionable characteristic of the Davis family, and of course a trait that I inherited. But for me, that didn't come to full realization until I had to spend 4 hours a day picking strawberries or macheting cornfields in Guatemala. In the curriculum, we addressed environmental effects from long-distance food transportation and chemical farming, and we talked about the vote-like effect consumers have by purchasing products from companies they support based on environmental or health reasoning, creating demand that distributors need to meet with supply. The most poignant aspect of the Guatemala unit, however, was not the curriculum, it was the trash. The immense amount of visible, physical trash. Every day, on the walk from our homestays to the home base, we passed a huge grazing field next to the highway that was spotted with white clumps of waste. And the sidewalks and roads were separated by a border of wet, dirty papers, wrappers, and produce. In some of the group's homestays, trash was burned in the ovens, and debris hung in the air at our home base. I had never before been so keenly aware of how much waste I produced, and suddenly I couldn't escape it. This is not to say that Guatemalans create more waste. In fact, I think my host family created far less waste than my real family does here in the US. My host mom had dinner portions down to a science. She saved our leftover food bits to make compost for the corn plants and avocado trees in the backyard. And nobody threw away articles of clothing just because they had newer, more fashionable clothes. The difference is that we have trash collection infrastructure that moves our trash into huge, far-off landfills so that it is less visible in our daily lives. This unit was not as important for my critical thinking as it was for my awareness. I found that in taking a few moments in my day, every day, to step back and try to view myself from the outside in, I gained perspective on my own interactions with the environment, and I've been able to make intentional changes about the companies I support and my personal contribution to waste. My final astounding aha moment was during a seminar just a few weeks ago in which we discussed foreign aid. I learned that aid takes many forms, from investment to donations to loans, and more often than not has unanticipated negative effects such as corruption and dependency. That shook my world. I had never considered that aid could be harmful because the intent is to be helpful. What really made all of this click for me was the idea of donations of goods destroying the domestic economies of these other countries. So after that seminar, I tried to put myself in the mindset of someone directly affected by thoughtless foreign aid, and I wrote a poem, which I will read to you now. I was king of the market, the only supplier in town. The way I was providing for my family, I might as well have been wearing a crown. The white saviors have come, seeking to help the have-nothing poor. They failed to ask what we needed. Down our throats, they shoved more and more. Suddenly, everything had changed. Demand and income depleted, but the free gifts from the developed countries, I had been unfairly outcompeted. The white saviors have come with their trade and investment. They gave foreign aid a new name, resource dumping, the suppressant. Now the gift reservoir is dry. Outside attention found a new target. My community needs my help, my supplies, but for a new job, my land I did forfeit. The white saviors have come, thinking they own all tactical shrewdness. They destroy our local markets and blame my country's economic ineptness. They flagrantly call us aid addicts, but refuse to open their eyes and properly see. They removed an important link in the chain leaving a gaping hole in the economy. Aid is a tricky thing, and I'm just glad I'm not the one in charge right now. But what I do know is this: the U.S. is a very powerful country, which means we have a lot of power to do a lot of good in this world. But we're not being helpful until we go into these small communities like Adaclu in Ghana or San Juan in Guatemala, and we ask what they need. Until we start doing that, we're still wasting resources, making assumptions, and imposing our opinions where they don't belong. Not only are we imposing our opinions, but we are imposing solutions to problems we think they have. It's scary to know how many people worldwide that poem could be about. And it's scarier that I was so oblivious to this, because I know that makes me one of hundreds of thousands. So I guess my next question is this: what do I do next? What do I do with this new, exciting ability to think critically and challenge others? I am very scared to lose it, especially returning to a normal classroom setting this fall, where divergent thinking based off of life experiences may not be valued as highly as it is with TBV. So that will be my biggest challenge, making sure that I am pushing myself to continue learning from my own understanding and then asking more questions. And in asking those questions, I hope to use them to bring other people into the conversation, as opposed to being condescending and wielding them as weapons. I now have an obligation to share what I have learned as a global citizen. Right now, it seems daunting, going home and trying to put the past 6 months of my life into words, because it has been so much more than even what I've been telling you about for the past 15 minutes. It has been challenging, emotional, gratifying, and confusing, but through individual conversations and presentations like this one, I can further connections over shared experiences with the members of my community. Nobody in Bowling Green, Kentucky has done TBV, but somebody has been abroad. Somebody has had communication issues due to a language barrier, and someone has struggled emotionally in an uncomfortable way. I just need to find the right audience, people who will value what I say and engage with me. Just because this trip is over and I have completed the curriculum does not mean I suddenly have all the answers. If anything, I just form more queries about development and foreign aid and oppression and identity and culture. My growth does not end here, but I am so blessed to be able to thank TBV for giving me a starting point so that I can do this for myself for the rest of my life. This program liberated me from years of linear thinking and math problems, and I feel more intelligent because of it. I am ready to step into the world and share my knowledge and understanding as an agent of change. Thank you. Any questions? I'm ready. Yeah.
Can you share your poem with us? Your poem. The
My
one that you
poem?
wrote? Yes.
Get it to you later?
Yes, please.
I can do that. Facebook group, I know where you are. Yes, ma'am.
I hear from you a negative slant on USAID and development. Did you find any good examples of that?
I think the company that I agreed with the most was Peace Corps, and I think several members of my group might agree with me. I don't want to speak for them, but actually what I said about us imposing our solutions to problems we think they have was something I got from Peace Corps. And they really value going into these communities like I had talked about and listening to that community. And so the whole first year of Peace Corps is spent really working with the community to figure out what kind of project they think they need, and the second year is spent implementing that. And so that conversation went really well for me, and it is the program that I'm considering for the future, so we'll see. Good timing on the alarm.
I don't know about students from Bowling Green, but there's a former program leader from Bowling Green, Kentucky that you should I know Danielle.
What?
Of course you do.
Yeah.
Danielle?
Yeah, I know Danielle. She actually came to visit me like 2 months ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Let's check it out.
All right.
Small world.
I'd just like to say that Emma and I are really proud of you.
For those of you that don't know, I have an issue with it. In my house, we call it the P word, and we don't use it unless we really, really, really mean it. And so I know that my mom was amazed that I dropped that word.
You just did so awesome. I love you.
Thanks.